Hello everyone, welcome back to our second session of our online learning classes. I hope you enjoyed the last video and I hope you learned a lot even though we didn't have any interaction. So we're going to go ahead and continue to Lesson C in Unit 5. So if you look at page 62 in your student's book, you'll see the lesson title is Verb Tense Contrast. Verb Tense Contrast. So we're going to go ahead and watch the video for this grammar lesson.
Verb Tense Contrast. Unit 5, Lesson C. Repeated actions in the past and present. In sentences that talk about repeated actions, the correct word order is subject plus verb plus number of times plus time expression. The number of times answers the questions, how often? The time expression answers the question, when? Present.
This year, Sana volunteers at the homeless shelter 3 times a week.
This year, Sana is volunteering at the homeless shelter several times a month.
Past.
Sana volunteered at the homeless shelter once last year.
Sana volunteered at the homeless shelter twice when she was 12.
Present perfect.
Sana has volunteered at the homeless shelter several times recently.
Sana has volunteered at the homeless shelter many times in her life.
Check your understanding. Look at the picture and the tense. Complete the sentences using the correct form of the verb in parentheses. Now listen to the sentences.
This year, Sana volunteers at the homeless shelter 3 times a week.
This year, Sana is volunteering at the homeless shelter 3 times a week.
Sana volunteered at the homeless shelter once last year.
Sana volunteered at the homeless shelter twice when she was 12.
Sana has volunteered at the homeless shelter several times recently.
Sana has volunteered at the homeless shelter many times in her life.
Okay, so let's review. If you look at the chart, you'll see 3 tenses: present tense, past tense, and present perfect tense. But let me make a note. If you look at the present tense, the first sentence says, this year, Sana volunteers at the homeless shelter. And the second sentence says, this year, Sana is volunteering at the homeless shelter. So both are present tense, but the second sentence is actually more common if we include the phrase this year. So if you remember from our Ventures Level 3 class, we learned 3 different usages of the present continuous tense. The first one, of course, is something that's happening right now. For example, I am teaching English right now, and you are watching the video right now. So that's the most obvious common usage for present continuous tense. But we also use it for future tense when we're talking about something that's going to happen in the future. So for example, you might say, I am cooking dinner for my family this weekend. So this weekend is the future, but we use the present continuous sometimes to talk about the future. And then another usage is to talk about something that is repeated or something that is going to happen regularly or that is happening regularly within a certain time frame. that's going on now as well. So I'm sorry if that's a little confusing, but so for example, you might say this year, so throughout this year, I am volunteering at an animal shelter. So I'm not doing it right now because right now I'm teaching, but it means that just throughout this year or throughout a specific time period, it's something that's ongoing. So I think I remember that was actually the phrase that we used in the book. For ongoing activities, we also use the present continuous tense. So you might also say, this spring we are taking English classes online. So we're doing that right now too, but it's a continued, repeated, ongoing activity for a certain time period. So okay, let's see. Okay, let me say that again. So we also use the present continuous tense for ongoing activities that you are taking part in currently, not future, but also presently. So we might say, we are taking English classes online this spring. And that's true because this season we are limited due to the coronavirus. So we are taking classes online. And we're doing that now, but we're also doing that for this current time period. So we can also use present continuous for ongoing activities. And that actually explains why we use present continuous more often for cases like the second sentence. This year, Santa is volunteering at the homeless shelter. That's more common than to use the first example, present tense. This year, Santa volunteers at the homeless shelter. We use present tense when we are talking about just our routine. So, for example, it's more common to say, Santa volunteers at the homeless shelter once a week, or once a month, or 3 times a month. So let's go ahead and look at exercise 2, practice. I'm going to give you some time to complete the story, and then I'm going to play the audio version of the story.
Page 62, Exercise 2A.
Sharing with Sally. Sally Sutherland created Sharing with Sally, a volunteer organization that helps seniors stay connected with the outside world. The organization has delivered over 5,000 dinners to seniors so far. Sharing with Sally began 6 years ago. Several times a week, Sally and her volunteers deliver meals, talk to seniors on the phone, and visit the ones who can't leave their homes. Over 200 people volunteer at Sharing with Sally. Jake, a college student, volunteered all last year. He called elderly people on the phone once a week and talked to each person. He said it was a very valuable experience. Betsy, a 35-year-old mother of 2, has volunteered for 2 years so far and loves it.
Okay, so now let's look at page 63, exercise B. Make sentences about Betsy's volunteer experience. Include the number of times and time expressions. Okay, so letter A, Betsy visited seniors at their homes 30 times last year. B, she's also visited them 15 times so far this year. And as you can see in the useful language box, she's also visited them is short for she has also visited them. If you look at the first sentence, you can see that that is past tense. And then B is present perfect tense. So I want you to look at the list of activities, and you'll see 2 more columns, number of times last year, and of course that means this is past tense, and then number of times this year, so far. So that's present perfect tense. Okay, so I actually want you to practice with a partner if you can, someone in your family, or you can of course just practice on your own, but try to do it out loud, just so you can get in the habit of talking in English. And so let's look at the first letter one more time. Betsy visited seniors at their home 30 times last year. So I want you to make a question using 30 times as the answer. Okay, so we can say, how many times did Betsy visit seniors at their homes last year? So we use the helping verb did because this is a past tense question, and of course we can see last year, so that's a big hint. And then letter B, she's also visited them 15 times so far this year. So we already talked about this, but this is present perfect tense. She has also visited is a big hint, and also so far is a hint as well. So I'll give you some time to make a question for that sentence and use 15 times as the answer. Okay, so you can say, how many times has she visited them this year? Or how many times has she visited them so far this year? Okay, so now I want you to do the same thing for each of the activities on the list and answer the questions as well. Okay, so the first activity is already done in the example, so let's look at the second activity. So we might ask, how many times did Betsy call seniors on the phone last year? And then we can answer, Betsy or she called seniors on the phone 30 times last year. And for the second question, the present perfect question, we can say, how many times has she called seniors on the phone so far this year? Okay, the third activity, we can ask, how many times did Betsy help Sally put meals in the truck last year? And we can answer, she helped Sally put meals in the truck 5 times last year. And for the second question, we can ask, how many times has Betsy helped Sally put meals in the truck so far this year? So we can say, she's also helped Sally put meals in the truck once this year. Of course, you can say one time, but it's more common to use once. Okay, and the next one, how many times has Betsy delivered meals last year? We can say she delivered meals 25 times last year. And then the second question, how many times has she delivered meals so far this year? She's also delivered meals 10 times so far this year. The next one, how many times did she return equipment to the truck last year? She returned equipment to the truck 20 times last year. And then the second question, how many times has she returned equipment to the truck so far this year? She has returned, or she has also returned equipment to the truck 5 times so far this year. How many times did she take her children with her to the seniors' home last year? She took her children with her to the seniors' home 10 times last year. And then how many times has she taken her children with her to the seniors' home so far this year? She's also taken her children with her to the seniors' home 3 times so far this year. How many times did she volunteer to read to seniors last year? She volunteered to read to seniors 5 times last year. And then how many times has she volunteered to read to seniors so far this year? And we can also say, so far this year, she has volunteered to read to seniors twice. And then finally, the last one, how many times did she clean the truck last year? She cleaned the truck 10 times last year. And then, how many times has she cleaned the truck so far this year? So far, she has cleaned the truck 4 times this year. So you can see I changed the position of some of those phrases, the time expressions. So for example, so far this year can be put at the end or the beginning, or you can even split them up. So far, she has cleaned the truck 4 times this year. Or you can even say this year, she has cleaned the truck 4 times so far. Okay, so let's look at exercise 3. So it says make a list of your experiences volunteering or helping people. So you can use the experience that you talked about in exercise 3 on page 61 for lesson B. So you talked about a time that you helped someone or volunteered. So you can use that same experience. And if you look at the example, it says last year, took my grandmother to the hairdresser. This year, volunteer at a homeless shelter. So if you have a partner with you, then you can practice with your partner. Or as I mentioned, you can just practice on your own. But if you look at the example in exercise B, it says, how often did you take your grandmother to the hairdresser last year? You can answer every week, or in sentence form, you can say, I took my grandmother to the hairdresser every week last year. So when we use how often, then we use expressions like every or once or twice rather than the number of times. So let's look at the next question. How often do you volunteer at a homeless shelter? So this one is for this year, present tense. You can say several times a year, or I volunteer at a homeless shelter several times a year. So this is just talking about your routine, which is why we use present tense. And then the last one, how many times have you volunteered at the homeless shelter so far this year? And you can see 3 times. So in this case, because it says 3, you can use how many. How many times have you volunteered? So you can say, I have volunteered 3 times so far this year. Or I have volunteered at the homeless shelter 3 times so far this year. Okay, so let's open our workbook to page 58, lesson C, verb tense contrast. Okay, so exercise 1, circle the verbs, then write present, present perfect, or past. This one's pretty easy because we're just identifying the tense, so we're going to do this together. So after I read each sentence, you can write down the tense, or you can just say the tense. I'll just pause very briefly between each sentence. Okay, so number 1, I play games with the children in the hospital each Wednesday. So this one is already done for us. You can circle the verb play, which is present tense. So you can see it says present tense. Number 2, Jeremy went to the homeless shelter 10 times last year. Okay, so the verb is went, and this is past tense. Okay, number 3, I delivered dinners to senior citizens every Monday after school last year. So the verb is delivered, and this is also past tense. Number 4, we have visited our grandfather twice so far this month. So the verb is have visited, and this is present perfect tense. Number 5, Nina takes her grandmother to the hairdresser every week. The verb is takes, and this is present tense. And number 6, I have worked with elderly people many times in the past. The verb is have worked, and this is present perfect tense. Okay, actually let me make a comment. You might be confused because the tense is present perfect because we can see the verb is have worked. But there's a phrase at the end of the sentence in the past that makes it seem like this sentence is past tense. But have worked is present perfect tense. But for this sentence, when we say in the past, we mean like from some point in the past until now. So it's common to use present perfect tense with the phrase in the past, but you can also use past tense. So it's also common to say, I worked with elderly people many times in the past. Okay, so now what I want you to do is take some time to make questions using how often or how many times.